No matter how hard you work, life is getting more unaffordable by the day. Housing is unaffordable, there's a cost of living crisis, energy prices keep rising, and in some places even food is becoming a struggle. But even if you're not choosing between food, rent, or heating, your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to, because prices keep rising but wages don't. Why is this happening, and can we do anything about it? The good news is there is hope and plenty we can do to fix it, but it's incredibly important to understand the problem before we look at the solution. Housing, energy, and food. Just because the prices are rising, these things are not necessarily more valuable as time goes on. The truth is, each year your currency is less and less valuable, and at an ever-increasing rate. The US dollar has lost 96.8% of its purchasing power since 1913, and the British pound has lost 99% of its value. Simply put, the problem is money printing. This is the primary source of inflation, since you are literally inflating the volume of money in the system. But inflation is necessary for the economy to grow, isn't it? Well, actually no, as we'll soon see. So what is inflation? What is fiat currency, and how did we end up in this mess? Many things have been used as money historically: seashells, grain, salt, silver, gold, and more recently government paper, i.e. fiat currencies. But why were these things used as money? Grains and salt have intrinsic value because people can eat the grains and use the salt to preserve food. The problem with grains or salt, though, is that these things are not durable, and the value is destroyed when the grains are eaten by rats or mold, or the salt dissolves in humidity. Eventually, people started to use silver as money because it's durable, tradable, portable, and scarce. But after that, gold beat silver as money because it was even scarcer. When the world moved from silver to gold as a monetary standard in the 1870s, China remained on the silver standard until 1935. This made China one of the last countries to fully adopt the gold standard. Many European countries grew very wealthy by taking advantage of the different exchange rates between silver and gold on the two continents. When the world discovered electricity and radio communications, the global economy sped up significantly, and suddenly, moving massive amounts of gold bullion between countries was slow, risky, and expensive. To be able to have transaction finality at higher speeds and with less risk or costs, governments and banks used paper banknotes, which acted as a claim to the underlying gold the banks held. However, governments and banks had much more control of the supply of paper banknotes than they did of the gold that underlaid their value. And this is where the problem starts. Gold is mined at around 2% a year, increasing the supply and devaluing the gold by roughly the same percent. The less gold that is mined, the higher the value. The more incentive to mine gold, the more gold that was mined, and the less each ounce was worth, and this cycle of inflation continues to this day. Ultimately, it's supply and demand that determines the price of gold. In 1934, 1 ounce of gold was worth $20.67. That same year, the US government and central bank, the Federal Reserve, decided to revalue the dollar so that 1 ounce of gold was worth $35. It wasn't that the gold became more valuable, the dollar just became less valuable. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced the United States would no longer accept dollars for gold, ending the gold standard and marking the transition to a fiat currency system. This meant that a dollar's value is essentially because the government said so, and not because it was tied to any claim on a physical commodity like gold. Because the dollar was no longer tied to gold, the government had complete control over the supply of dollars in the system and could print as many dollars as they needed to fund government programs and war. Each time they printed money, this caused inflation. The dollar lost value, and prices rose because more dollars were chasing after the same amount of goods and services. Inflation has some pretty nasty effects on the mechanics of economies, though. It causes a distortion of price signals, an increase of input costs for businesses, and asset inflation. Unlike gold's price, which was set by supply and demand, when fiat currencies enter the economy via the government, it introduces artificial demand into the economy, which distorts the price signals, meaning businesses are constantly one step behind when setting prices and consumers are one step further behind that. When raw material input costs increase, businesses now have 3 choices. They can try to reduce costs, they can reduce product size or quality, also called shrinkflation, or they can raise prices for customers. When medical or healthcare companies are forced to reduce costs, lower quality, or raise prices, this can lead to a health crisis. The third nasty effect of inflation is rising asset prices. People who own assets might celebrate this, but it comes at the cost of a crumbling social structure, a weakened economy, reduced quality of products and food, and inevitably a health crisis. And importantly, anyone who doesn't own assets does not see any benefits. and inequality grows wider and wider. All of these problems require more government intervention, and the solution they come up with each time is to print more money to keep the system going. But every time they do this, they make the problem worse. This is why the fiat currency system is ruining your life. But there is hope. What if we had a money that no one could print, manipulate, or control? That's exactly why Bitcoin was created.